Hello, and welcome to our channel. Climate change is a crisis impacting every aspect of our lives, and today we're going to focus on the impact of climate change on housing. As the effects of climate change become more and more evident, it's important to understand how they may affect the places where we live and the structures that shelter us. In the United States, there are several cities that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Cities like Miami, New Orleans, New York City, and Houston are likely to see significant changes in the coming years, and it's important for people who live in these cities and for anyone who's thinking about buying a home in these areas to understand the risks and how these changes will affect the housing market in these areas. For example, the city of Miami is already experiencing the effects of sea level rise. Flooding is becoming more common, and many homes and businesses are at risk of damage or destruction. In order to protect against these impacts, the city is implementing a range of measures, including the installation of pumps and seawalls, the raising of roads, and the use of permeable pavement. However, these measures are costly, and it's unclear how effective they will be in the long term. Another potential impact of climate change is extreme weather events. These events, such as hurricanes and wildfires, can cause significant damage to homes and communities. For example, in 2017, Hurricane Harvey caused widespread flooding and damage to homes in Houston, Texas. Similarly, in 2018, a Camp Fire wildfire in California destroyed more than 18,000 homes. Cities that are vulnerable to these types of events include Tampa, Houston, and LA. The effects of extreme weather events can be devastating for those who are affected. In addition to the physical damage to homes, these events can also disrupt people's lives and communities. For example, after a natural disaster, people may need to evacuate their homes and seek temporary shelter. They may also face financial challenges, such as the cost of repairing or rebuilding their homes, or the loss of income due to the disruption of their businesses. Climate change can also lead to drought, which can have a serious implication for housing. Drought occurs when there is a prolonged period of time with little or no precipitation. This can cause water shortages, which can make it difficult for people to maintain their homes and gardens. Droughts can also cause land subsidence, which is when the ground sinks due to a lack of water. This can damage foundations and infrastructure, potentially rendering homes uninhabitable. Many large cities such as Las Vegas, Phoenix, and San Diego are especially vulnerable to drought. In addition to the direct impacts on housing, drought can also have economic consequences. It can reduce crop yields, leading to higher food prices. It can also lead to water shortages, which can impact businesses and industries that rely on water. The impacts of these changes on the housing market are widespread, but before we get into those, please just take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It's a big help in making sure that news and information gets to more viewers just like yourself. Now that we've discussed the scope of the problem, let's get into the many ways that climate change will directly and indirectly impact the housing market. Affordable housing in major U.S. cities is a growing problem, and climate change will only make it more difficult. As sea levels rise and extreme weather events become more common, many homes and buildings may be damaged or destroyed. This will lead to a shortage of available housing, and it could drive up the cost of existing housing in these cities. In addition to making housing less affordable, climate change could also make it more difficult for people to find adequate housing that meets their needs. Housing is generally designed to be best suited for a climate it currently exists in, but as that changes, these structures will no longer be optimally suited for their environment. For example, as temperatures rise, people may need to find homes with air conditioning, better insulation, sun reflectivity, hurricane resistance, and other features that can help them stay cool and comfortable. This could be particularly challenging for low-income residents who may not be able to afford the higher costs of homes better suited for the new climate environment. Infrastructure is another area very vulnerable to climate change, which will affect housing in cities by making it more difficult for people to get around. As sea levels rise and extreme weather events become more common, roads and other transportation infrastructure could be damaged or destroyed. This would make it more difficult for people to travel to work, to school, and to other important destinations. It could also make it more difficult for businesses to operate, and for people to have access to essential services. To address these challenges, cities will need to take a number of steps. One of the most important things they can do is to invest in infrastructure that is more resilient to the impacts of climate change. This could include building seawalls and other structures to protect against flooding, and investing in infrastructure that can withstand the effects of extreme weather events. Congress recently passed a major infrastructure bill that could help us with this, but it's a down payment, and much more still needs to be done. In addition to investing in infrastructure, these cities will also need to work with developers and other stakeholders to create more affordable housing options that are also designed to be more adaptable to a changing environment. This would include building more affordable housing units and providing incentives to developers to create housing that is accessible to low-income residents, or adapting existing structures such as unused office buildings into new housing. Now, so far we've talked about how climate change can directly affect housing through sea level rise, extreme weather events and drought, but there are also indirect effects to consider. For example, as the effects of climate change become more severe, people may choose to move away from areas that are at high risk. This could lead to a decline in property values, making it harder for people to sell their homes or obtain mortgages. Additionally, as the demand for housing in safer, less vulnerable areas increases, the cost of housing in those areas may rise. This could make it much more difficult for people to afford to live in those areas, potentially leading to homelessness. Now, it's worth noting that the impact of climate change on housing will not be uniform across the United States. Different areas will be more or less vulnerable depending on their specific location and the types of hazards they face. A city that is vulnerable to sea level rise may not be as vulnerable to drought, and vice versa. There are steps that people can take to protect their homes and communities from the impacts of climate change. These can include measures such as installing flood protection systems, building homes to withstand extreme weather events, and using drought-resistant landscaping. It's also important for communities to consider the long-term risks of climate change when planning for new developments or infrastructure projects. Cities like Miami, New Orleans, and Houston will need to work with their residents to help them adapt to the impacts of climate change. This could include providing education and training on how to prepare for extreme weather events, and helping residents to access the resources they need to stay safe and healthy during these events. By taking these steps, cities can protect their housing markets and ensure that they remain vibrant and thriving. This will be essential for the long-term health and prosperity of these cities and for the millions of residents who live and work in them. Despite the challenges that climate change presents to the housing market, there are also some opportunities for these cities to grow and thrive in the face of these challenges. By investing in infrastructure that is more resilient to the impacts of climate change, these cities can position themselves as leaders in the field of climate adaptation. This could attract new businesses and residents to the cities, and it could help stimulate economic growth. Another opportunity is for cities to encourage development of new industries and technologies that can help mitigate the impacts of climate change. For example, these cities could invest in renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind power, and in technologies that can capture and store carbon emissions. These could create new jobs and economic opportunities in these cities, and it could help to reduce the overall impact of climate change on the planet. Now, in conclusion, the impact of climate change on housing is complex and multifaceted. It can directly affect homes through sea level rise, extreme weather events, and drought. And it can also have indirect effects such as declining property values and rising housing costs. It's important for individuals and communities to consider the potential impacts of climate change when making decisions about where to live and how to protect their homes. By taking action now, we can work to mitigate the negative effects of climate change and create more resilient communities. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more content just like this. We'd also like to get your feedback on how you think climate change will affect housing in the future. So please join the discussion in the comments down below. Talk to you soon.